Welcome back. Well, Canadians were part of something unique this week, the birth of an entirely new commercial industry. As only the second country in the world to legalize weed nationally, the opportunities are enormous, but not only for profit. W5's new correspondent, Peter Akman, spent time with one of the country's major new pot pioneers, a leader who's hoping the new leaf can bring relief to his people.
Over the rustic trees and lakes of northern Manitoba, almost 600 kilometers north of Winnipeg, sits a small Indigenous community called the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. Today is an important milestone. Even though the First Nation has existed for thousands of years, it's the first time it's raising its own flag, proclaiming itself a sovereign nation.
And we are proud to say that we are now standing equally with our partners as we move forward towards reconciliation.
And at the center of the ceremony is a man everybody here knows. Christian Sinclair is the First Nations chief, but don't call him that. He prefers the Cree word oniganu, the one who stands in front. And right now he's standing in front of a community in dire need.
So what's missing from your community?
As of right now, what we need is we're in a challenging situation where we now have to build more infrastructure, water, infrastructure, sewer, and more roads to be able to build more housing. The reality is we're second-class citizens living in third-world conditions in a first-world country.
Sinclair has a big idea to help those problems go away.
Where did you get the idea that marijuana could be sort of that first step towards fixing the problems in your community?
So the fact that this new emerging economy of cannabis is taking root, no pun intended, in Canada, it puts us at the forefront as a country, but also as First Nations to be afforded that opportunity that has never been given to us before.
This is the epicenter, the hub of this community, isn't it?
That's correct.
This is where a new cannabis store is opening, in the heart of Opaskwaяк's main mall.
You've got the food court, you've got sports and music, and this will be where you get your pot.
Absolutely. This is going to be the location. It's centralized right in the heart of the Tinnekay Mall itself.
But if you think this is just a story about a reserve that's opening a mall pot store, you don't know the half of it.
You've got others in the works, dozens of other locations.
That's correct. Throughout Manitoba, we're hoping to have 7 opened and approximately 26 in Alberta.
And that's just a start. Within the next few months, Sinclair's First Nation will be part owners of dozens of recreational cannabis stores right across Canada. They're called Meta-Cannabis Supply Stores. Goal is to open more than 200 in provinces where private sales are allowed. Maybe as close as your local Second Cup. Canada's second biggest coffee retailer has struck a deal with Meta's parent company and plans to convert several of its cafes into those Meta stores, guaranteeing some high-traffic urban locations.
How big could this be?
Well, with some of the estimates as we've heard, it's going to be in the hundreds of millions for the company, which means tens of millions for Opaskwayak Cree Nation.
Yes, tens of millions. This reserve of only 2,800 people is the single biggest shareholder of National Access Cannabis. That's the company that owns those Meta stores. NAC already runs several medical marijuana stores across Canada.
How did you get involved with NAC, National Access Cannabis?
We couldn't afford to get into it initially with our dire financial situation, but more importantly, we couldn't afford not to be part of this.
So how did a reserve in dire financial straits become the cannabis company's biggest investor? By chance. A year ago, a few chiefs invited Sinclair to a meeting that promised a free lunch.
We were coming from a chiefs meeting here in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
You walked through these doors and you saw this. This was lunch.
That's right, yeah. I came in here and thought, this is kind of an awkward place for having a late lunch.
So you finally come through this door.
Sinclair had walked into a presentation hosted by this man, Derek Ogden, the president of National Access Cannabis. Sinclair says Ogden made a pitch to put cannabis stores on First Nations reserves, and that gave him a big and risky idea.
I quickly turned that discussion around and said, instead of being a rung on your ladder, how do we become an owner of the whole corporate ladder?
And that's money.
And that's money and a considerable investment amount. So the dialogue started with Derek saying, well, how much do you have? And not knowing what that meant, we said, well, how much do you need?
A dangerous question.
The answer? $3 million.
And in my mind, I'm asking myself, okay, we're gonna have to figure this out in Opaskwayak. Where do we get that money from?
Opaskwayak Cree Nation was on the cusp of bankruptcy. Band accounting was fast and loose. It couldn't afford to build enough housing and desperately needed another school. Hardly ideal circumstances to play the stock market with a weed-selling company.
$3 million, how did that sit in your mouth?
$3 million, well, for me, I figured it's doable, and having faith in calculated risk is the key word here. It's not risk, it was calculated risk. Something inside told me that it's gonna be good for Opaskwayak, and if we don't do it now, no other First Nation is gonna take that leap of faith anywhere on that scale.
Christian Sinclair was up to the challenge. Though he was raised in a small Métis community in northern Manitoba, he joined the military to see the world. He was part of an elite commando unit and did 2 peacekeeping tours before being honorably discharged. Back in civilian clothes, he became a business advisor and went on to run the North American Indigenous Games. So successful, he was chosen as one of the top 40 Canadian executives under 40. Now he used all of that experience to make a plan to find the $3 million. There's a reason why Opaskwayak sign has Pepsi logos on it. It owns a big stake in a Pepsi franchise, just one of several profitable companies the band owns. Sinclair convinced council to leverage them all, and they ended up with a massive line of credit of $55 million.
You were moving fast, and how did council react? Because you told me they don't move quickly. They've never moved quickly.
No, and that's one of the pitfalls of First Nations. We had to convince and educate our community members on what this investment meant for Opaskwayak Cree Nation. So you can see the returns are very significant.
W5 was invited into the band council chambers, where Sinclair had to convince the leadership that selling drugs was a good idea. No easy task.
I don't know nothing about this marijuana, but the stories I hear about it, a lot of young people get into trouble with it.
There will be some problems that need to be dealt with, addictions and things like that, and we realize that. And we'll work towards putting whatever we need aside to make sure that those things are taken care of.
Does it sit weird, and I know some of the elders have mentioned that what is allowing you to stand up is a drug?
In our community, our elders, as you have heard, refer to it as muskegee or medicine, because it's a natural plant of this earth.
So we don't usually do this, but we're gonna move the camera over and show that actually sitting here watching you through this whole interview are your 2 children. How will you talk to your children about smoking pot?
Well, personally, I'm not a user. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't gamble. If people want to do that for entertainment, whatever, that's their prerogative.
Whether it's illegal or not, it causes a level of intoxication.
Yeah, well, this becomes, again, part of that education is alcohol has been probably the worst detrimental impact on our community as First Nations. I'd rather walk into a group of people smoking marijuana in the middle of the night than a group of people who have been drinking alcohol.
But not everyone's convinced. Chief Shining Turtle won't be putting a pot store on his reserve. His council's put a moratorium on the drug. That won't be lifted until they're sure it'll do more good than harm.
The difficulty we have as Indigenous people and First Nations is that there's a high level of unwellness. It's an uncharted path, and that frightens me. And there's going to be people that are going to get hurt. And so who gets sacrificed? Mostly marginalized people.
Shining Turtle leads Whitefish River First Nation near Sudbury, Ontario. He says many Indigenous communities have mental health and addiction epidemics. He fears adding recreational pot to the mix could make things worse.
To those folks that want to invest in that sort of situation, all I can say is good luck. But I'll always invest in our people.
Christian Sinclair is confident his reserve's problems can be managed better. if making millions of dollars. If that actually happens, because Opaskwayk's people have heard big promises of wealth before. Case in point, the Aseniskat Casino has more than 600 gaming machines, but it uses less than 200. The casino was built in 2002 and promised lots of tourist dollars and jobs, but that never really happened. As you can see, this place sits nearly empty most of the time because the reserve is remote and the local population very small. But there are lessons to be learned here. So coming up on 17 years since this casino opened, the hope of this building and the gaming was to bolster the local economy, but it didn't happen, did it?
No, unfortunately, the projections that were planned did not come to fruition. And what it showed us was that to underpromise and overdeliver really was the message and lesson learned in that process. But in the case of cannabis being a commodity, we know that 1 in 4 people, according to the statistical research, uses that product. So we know that that will be 1 in 4 people within our shitting area of this region.
And they won't have to be here to do it.
Absolutely, from coast to coast potentially.
So far, Opaskwayk's multi-million-dollar investment seems to be paying off. National Access Cannabis stock has grown by more than 200%. Sinclair's team is feeling pretty good. Somebody's going to make money. Why not you?
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be rich, eh?
5 years from now, what does your First Nation look like?
Our debt will be totally eliminated. We'll be able to make investments where it's greatly needed within infrastructure, within housing, within language, within our education systems. That allows us to build those components of a healthy, functioning society that you would see anywhere in this world. Beyond that, the Creator will decide what happens next in my future.
And as our coverage continues, W5 will introduce you to several former pro athletes, guys like Mike Tyson, who insist a certain strain of cannabis oil can heal chronic pain.
After a career filled with hits,
Cote with the left and Thornton with the right.
A player searches for relief.
Take this Vioxx, take this Percocet, take this sleeping pill.
When W5 continues.
As our coverage of week 1 of legal cannabis continues, a look at a market segment that is already exploding. There is a group of elite ex-athletes who have been using a low dose of medical marijuana to treat the chronic pain and swelling they developed during their pro careers that never left them. Boxers like Mike Tyson, football players, and the former enforcer for the Philadelphia Flyers, who TSN's Rick Westhead caught up with, tending his crop.
It's early September in rural Pennsylvania, and Riley Cote is examining his crop.
You know, some of these seeds are ready to fall and drop off. That's why we're trying to harvest right before they do that. And a lot of them, the seeds are pretty much ready to go here.
Cote is growing cannabis on more than 250 acres of farmland, 90 minutes northwest of Philadelphia, and about 1 million miles from his former life. Between 2006 and 2010, Cote was an enforcer with the Philadelphia Flyers.
I was full of piss and vinegar my first few years there and challenging everyone. Biggest guy, the guy with the most penalty minutes.
Cote with the left and Thornton with the right. What a great exchange!
I think I was averaging about a surgery and a half a year, whether it was fingers, knees, shoulders, eyes, nose, I mean, you name it. It took its toll, there's no question.
Cote managed his pain the same way so many athletes do, with prescription pills.
It was really my introduction to this world of, oh, you got inflammation, you got pain, here's some pills. You'll take this Vioxx, take this Percocet, take this sleeping pill. They're in the business of just taking care of you in the meantime, like in the here and now, and getting you on the ice and keeping you healthy for the 3 or 4 or 5 years that you're gonna be on the team. And that's about it. There's really no compassion. They don't care about your long-term issues.
In retirement, Cote found relief for his lingering pain on his own, with cannabis.
On a daily basis.
And in recent years, he's become both an evangelist and an entrepreneur.
Introducing this to athletes or normalizing the non-psychoactive cannabinoids through sports is what I'm trying to do. Changing the game and changing what people view cannabis as. It's not just a recreational tool. You know what I mean? It's industry. I mean, it's a viable crop for food, fiber, plastics, you name it.
Riley Cote is just one of many ex-athletes investing in this growing industry. Former NBA center Cliff Robinson, ex-NFLers Ricky Williams and Eugene Monroe, and Olympic snowboarder Ross Rebagliati are all in the game. The cannabis heavyweight, though?
My name is Daniel. I just started working here, kind of doing anything I'm asked, everything from getting coffee to rolling joints. This is for Mike. That's why it's so much pressure. I don't want to know if it's not up to his standards.
Mike Tyson uses cannabis to manage the pain that still lingers from his boxing career, a dozen years after it ended.
I use it every day because I'm in that excruciating kind of pain. It takes a lot of stress out of my pain and out of my day as well. Most athletes smoke marijuana or use marijuana in some particular manner, and they're trying to spread the word just like I am.
Tyson is building a multi-million-dollar cannabis empire with his company Tyson Ranch. Along with CEO Rob Hickman and partners Jay Stroman and Kevin Bell, Tyson broke ground outside of Los Angeles earlier this year on what he's calling a cannabis resort.
We just grabbed 410 acres in Desert Hot Springs, which we think ultimately will be the location for cultivation school, an event ground, kind of live amphitheater type of stuff, everything in one place.
100,000 square feet of retail. With a 10,000 square foot dispensary, you have to understand that we're thinking it's gonna be like a food court. We're gonna let all the dispensaries from the desert rent a little area from us. So you can come to this one spot and enjoy all the wares from the area. It's gonna be the first of its kind.
Their second year of growing is Perry County.
Back in Ole, Pennsylvania, Cote's outlook, at least in the short term, is more modest.
This year, cutting even would be a positive for us, because I mean, again, there's a lot of learning and variables that we're just trying to figure out.
This hasn't been an easy business for Cote to get off the ground, in part because of the stigma. Last year, while an assistant coach with Philadelphia's AHL team, Cote gave a presentation on the benefits of cannabis to the Flyers alumni, and he believes it may have cost him his job.
I was honest about my cannabis use while I was playing. I was honest about my cannabis use post-career and getting into the CBD oils. And then the following day, I got a phone call and I was kicked off the boat.
The Flyers said the decision to cut ties with Cote was made before he gave the speech.
It is what it is. I put myself out there and I have no hard feelings, telling you honest truth. It'll come full circle. Okay, I'm coming out.
And so, Cote is now all in on his post-hockey career. He's growing hemp, in part to harvest CBD, an extract that relieves pain without getting you high. CBD is the active ingredient in Cote's recently launched collection of health products called Body Check Wellness.
Our idea really is to take the Body Check Wellness brand and then make a white label for whatever player that would want to, be pushing his own brand, powered by Body Check Wellness. That's the play. I mean, getting guys that understand cannabinoids enough to stand behind it, that use it and actually want to represent it.
Are you an ex-athlete or something?
I am, yes. I played for the Flyers in my old life.
No
yeah.
Wow.
Cote travels more now in his new life than he ever did as an NHL player.
It's good.
In July, he was in the Hollywood Hills at actor Jim Belushi's house for a cannabis investor event.
Are you invested?
I'm dabbling in the space.
You are.
He was there with other ex-athletes, including former NFL running back Tiki Barber and ex-NBA power forward Al Harrington.
Good people use it. We know liquor industry is a $285 billion industry, but I think cannabis will surpass that, especially because, one, you have a lifestyle part of cannabis, but then you also have the medicinal side of it. For 7.5 years, I took Celebrex and Toradol, 2 in the morning, 1 at night. And it was on season and off season. That was the only way I could cope until I found CBD. I think that most of the players that are starting to invest are cannabis users. You know what I mean? And I think they have a passion for it. I think that a lot of them are tired of hiding in the shadows, and I think this is a way for them to come out.
The industry, meanwhile, is exploding. By 2020, sales of cannabis in this country are expected to exceed $6.8 billion, which would make it larger than the hard liquor market and almost as big as the wine market. That money hasn't yet turned into any major sports deals, but TSN has learned that at least 2 Canadian NHL teams have received multi-million-dollar sponsorship offers from cannabis companies.
I think within the next 5 years, you're going to see medical cannabis companies and recreational cannabis companies sponsoring, whether it's the NHL or the CFL, and players getting behind these endorsement deals. There's enough money now, especially in Canada, on the cannabis space to do that right now. It's the sports leagues that aren't ready for it.
Riley Cote is working to carve out his corner of this emerging market, and his hopes are high.
It's probably going to be 4 or 5 processing facilities popping up here in the next year. And then all of a sudden you're able to scale a 30-acre grow or 40-acre grow to, in the hundreds of thousands. I think there's such a huge opportunity here. I like to be in it from food to medicine and everything in between. I think the sky's the limit.
And those skies are much more open now. W5 continues in a moment.